Why do people always say dogs can see things humans can't? If you're hiking and your dog refuses to move forward, even though there's nothing visible ahead, would you still continue climbing? In May this year, Anna and her boyfriend went to a small mountain lodge for a getaway. In the mountains, her pet dog absolutely refused to move forward. Her boyfriend, who had a bad temper, hit the dog until it finally started walking. But after that, a series of strange events began to unfold. Anna was invited by her friend Ethan during her holiday. Ethan had taken over a small lodge at the mountain's peak and had renovated it. He described it as perfect for enjoying the views, walking pets and hiking, so he invited Anna to stay. Following Ethan's directions, they drove for nearly 3 hours to reach the remote location. However, the views from the mountain lodge were indeed stunning. After lunch and some rest, Ethan suggested they go into the mountains to gather wild vegetables and fruits. He mentioned mulberries and blackberries that were free to pick, but warned them to be cautious while walking the small trails. Anna and her boyfriend took their pet dog, Wawa, down the mountain to pick wild fruits. Wawa, a yellow dog, was always sneaky and suspicious-looking, with shifty eyes as if he'd done something wrong. As they began descending, Wawa hesitated and darted glances left and right, as if sensing something in the woods. Her boyfriend kicked the dog lightly, forcing it to walk cheerfully downhill. The wild fruits near the lodge seemed to have been picked clean, so they kept going for almost an hour until they reached a flat area. There was a large mulberry tree and many blackberries on the ground. The open view of the clearing was inviting, so they decided to rest there, picking fruits and giving Wawa some water and snacks. At that moment, an elderly man with a bamboo basket came up the trail from below. He seemed to be a local villager and grew angry upon seeing them. Pointing at the scattered sausages, he began scolding them in a thick, local dialect that was hard to understand. Anna gathered he was upset about them leaving food on the ground. Thinking it was just food for the dog, she didn't take it seriously or argue with him. After the old man left in a hurry, they thought nothing of it. But later, they realized the real reason behind his anger. Shortly after the old man left, the sky darkened and a chilly wind began to blow. Even though it was May, the mountain's temperature dropped rapidly. Feeling cold after sitting for a while, Anna and her boyfriend decided to head back to the lodge. But as they started walking, Wawa froze on the trail, hesitant to move forward. He stared ahead, glancing nervously to the left and right, stepping forward cautiously, only to retreat immediately as if terrified. Anna and her boyfriend tried to ignore him and continued uphill, but Wawa whimpered and refused to follow. Thinking the dog was just lazy, Anna was about to pick him up, but her boyfriend said, "Don't coddle him, he's always sneaky like a little thief. A good beating will fix him." As her boyfriend approached to hit Wawa, the dog suddenly turned and bolted downhill, running at full speed. Her boyfriend chased after him, while Anna stood in the middle of the trail, waiting. Suddenly, Anna felt her shoulder bag being yanked forcefully from behind, almost knocking her over. When she turned around, there was nothing there, but her bag's zipper was clearly torn open as if it had been pulled hard. A chilling sense of unease crept over her. The dense vegetation on both sides of the trail should have rustled if there was any animal around, but it was eerily silent. She shouted to her boyfriend, "Catch Wawa quickly! Let's go back now." But her boyfriend, clumsy and slow, just couldn't catch up with the dog. Anna hurriedly went down to help, and it took both of them to restrain Wang Wang. The dog was still defiant, trying to escape. Her boyfriend gave it a couple of smacks and finally tied the leash, managing to lead Wang Wang up the mountain. However, Wang Wang stuck closely to their legs, neither moving ahead nor lagging behind. As they took a step, so did the dog, constantly glancing left and right, with a shifty demeanor, as if something really was hiding in the forest. At this moment, Anna glanced at her phone. It was a little after 4 p.m. Although it was overcast, it was still daytime. Her boyfriend was by her side, and he didn't seem too worried. But after walking uphill for over an hour, when they thought they should almost be there, they realized the trail still stretched endlessly ahead. Meanwhile, dusk was rapidly approaching, much faster than they had expected. Anna took out her phone, intending to ask Ethan to pick them up. But at this point, neither Anna's nor her boyfriend's phone had any signal. Her boyfriend wasn't too concerned, saying it was normal for mountain areas to have poor reception. He reassured her that since it took an hour to walk downhill earlier, going uphill would take a bit longer, and they should reach their destination soon. He suggested, "Let's rest here for a bit." Just as he said this, Wang Wang suddenly started whimpering and whining frantically, struggling against the leash as if trying to flee. Startled, her boyfriend tried to calm the dog, but Wang Wang kept pulling backward, attempting to run. Anna urged, "Just pick Wang Wang up and let's get moving. Something feels off in this mountain." Her boyfriend carried Wang Wang and continued walking. Even in his arms, Wang Wang kept whimpering, but stopped after a while, beginning to tremble all over. They suspected the dog might be sick, but didn't have the energy to worry about it since the night was closing in. They used their phones as flashlights to illuminate their way, feeling increasingly anxious with no signal to call for help. As they walked, Anna noticed something strange. They had somehow returned to the flat area where they had earlier picked blackberries. On the ground were the empty pet sausage wrappers and used tissues they had discarded earlier. They had been climbing uphill the entire time, so how could they end up here again? A chill ran down Anna's spine as she realized something eerie was happening. Her boyfriend began shouting for help, but after only 2 cries, they heard rustling in the bushes as if many animals were approaching. By the light of their phones, Anna and her boyfriend saw a small, thin, and completely white creature dart out from the bushes. It went straight for Anna's bag and the snack bag her boyfriend was holding. The creature had no fur but long hair on its head, and its face was indistinct. It had no tail and was only slightly larger than a monkey. While this one snatched their belongings, several smaller ones seemed to be standing further away. Fortunately, the white creature left after grabbing what it wanted. Anna and her boyfriend stood frozen, not daring to move. Once the creatures were gone, they sprinted up the mountain. Even after reaching their lodge, they were still shaken. After calming down, Anna asked Ethan what those strange white creatures were. Ethan looked uneasy as he replied, "Just wild monkeys from the mountain." "You must have seen it wrong. Don't worry." The next day, Anna and her boyfriend asked some local villagers for help retrieving their backpack. When the villagers heard about white, tailless monkeys, they fell silent and led them to a rocky area halfway up the mountain. Sure enough, Anna's backpack was there, but all the food was gone. When they asked the villagers about the white monkeys, no one would say anything. Only an old man muttered, "If you saw them, it's your fate." Whatever that meant, they couldn't figure it out. Later, when Anna and her boyfriend returned home, they recounted the incident to his grandfather. The grandfather explained, during the Great Famine years ago, many people went up that mountain searching for food or wild vegetables, with some even settling there. There was a landslide, and several people were trapped inside a cave. This event happened decades ago, but it was unclear if it had any connection to the tailless white monkeys Anna described. Since then, whenever Anna and her boyfriend saw Wang Wang acting shifty and reluctant to approach certain places, they made sure to steer clear. And that's the story of Anna and the yellow dog, Wang Wang. There was a series of urgent knocks on the door. Nate thought it might be a friend with an emergency and quickly got out of bed. But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. This happened when Nate was 19 years old. Since he had been raised by his grandfather, he was left alone after his grandfather passed away. He started working early, living a monotonous 9-to-5 life that left him feeling lost about the future. One day, a childhood friend, Zach, heard about his situation and invited Nate to visit him in the coastal city where he lived. Full of hope, Nate packed his bags and traveled to that seaside city. After years apart, Zach greeted Nate warmly, even arriving early at the station to pick him up. However, when they reached Zach's place, Nate began to sense something unusual. It wasn't that the room itself was strange, but rather that Zach and many of his co-workers lived in an eerie building. These co-workers were overly friendly to Nate, and their excessive enthusiasm felt unsettling. Still, warm hospitality was better than cold indifference, so Nate settled into his room. That's when the strange events began. That night, exhausted from the trip, Nate felt a heavy drowsiness come over him by 9 p.m. After a quick wash, he lay on the bed, intending to watch some videos before sleeping. But before long, without even turning off the light, he dozed off on his side. At some point, Nate dreamed of someone calling his name. The voice was faint, as if coming from far away. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. The voice grew louder, inching closer, as though the caller was walking toward him and eventually stood behind him. In the dream, Nate felt annoyed. He was exhausted and just wanted to sleep. Why couldn't they let him rest? But the voice persisted, moving right to his ear and sharply saying, "Get up now and leave." He even felt a cold breath against his neck, sliding down his back. Startled, he woke up. It was only a dream. It wasn't even midnight yet, and he had barely slept 3 hours before being jolted awake. He chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place and tried to reassure himself. Leaving the light on for comfort, he drifted back to sleep. Just as he was on the verge of falling asleep again, loud knocking suddenly echoed through the room. Startled awake once more, he thought it might be another dream. But the knocking came again, rapid and accompanied by the rattling of the doorknob. Thinking it might be an emergency, Nate jumped out of bed and opened the door without hesitation. A cold gust of wind rushed past him as the door opened, sending chills down his spine. The hallway was empty. Summoning his courage, Nate checked the hallway, but no one was there. Could it have been his imagination? Too scared to stay in the room alone, Nate immediately went to Zach's room and recounted what had happened. Zach dismissed it, saying he had lived there for over 6 months without encountering anything strange, and suggested that Nate might have been dreaming. To reassure him, Zach accompanied Nate back to his room. Despite this, the earlier experience left Nate too shaken to sleep, while Zach quickly dozed off beside him. Nate aimlessly scrolled through his phone until around 2 a.m. when he noticed Zach trembling in his sleep. Zach began muttering in his sleep, his voice muffled and fearful, saying, "Grandpa, I'm sorry, I really just invited him for fun." Suddenly, Zach sat bolt upright, looked at Nate with panic, and asked if he had just grabbed his arm. Nate shook his head, replying, "You seem to be dreaming and even talked in your sleep." He explained what had happened, but Zach said nothing, instead turning on the light to check his arm. To their shock, there was a bruise, as if someone had grabbed him forcefully. Neither of them slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, Zach urged Nate to leave immediately, confessing that the place was actually an illegal organ trafficking base and that they had lured Nate there for his organs. Though furious at Zach's betrayal, Nate was more curious about why Zach suddenly had a change of heart and told him the truth. Zach, visibly frightened, wouldn't explain at the time. It wasn't until much later that Zach revealed he had dreamed of Nate's grandfather that night. Nate suddenly remembered the voice in his own dream, the one that kept urging him to leave. It sounded just like his grandfather, the strict, stoic man who had always warned him to stay out of trouble.